Have you ever wondered what a person is truly capable of when everything is on the line? Not what they say they can do, but what is written into the very fiber of their being, forged in fires you can't imagine and tempered in pressures you will never know. We build our world on assumptions, on the uniforms people wear and the jobs they perform. We see a title, a name tag, a function, and we believe we understand the person. But we are almost always wrong. We are about to see just how wrong we can be. The control room of the deep-sea research vessel Triton was a symphony of controlled chaos, a pressure cooker of blinking red lights and strained voices. Every screen, every monitor, every single pixel screamed one word: failure. At the center of it all stood Arthur Harrison, a man whose tailored suit seemed to wilt under the weight of the impending disaster. He was the visionary CEO of Harrison Dynamics, the mind behind the multi-billion-dollar submersible now trapped 400 meters below them, a metal coffin snagged on an unforgiving reef. Inside, two of his best pilots, his friends, were watching their oxygen counters tick down to zero. He ran a hand through his silvering hair, the gesture doing nothing to calm the frantic hummingbird of panic beating against his ribs. His operations manager, Greg, a man whose confidence always outpaced his competence, was barking orders that echoed with the hollow ring of futility. Recalibrate the manipulator arm, Sector 4. Send the diagnostics again. I want a full power cycle on the primary winch. Follow the protocol, people. Protocol exists for a reason. Greg's voice was a shield, his adherence to the rulebook a desperate attempt to impose order on a situation that had long since spiraled out of his control. He was a man clinging to a life raft in a hurricane, shouting instructions at the waves. The crew, haggard and pale under the fluorescent lights, moved with a grim, practiced urgency, their faces masks of concentration. But Harrison could see the truth in their eyes. They were out of ideas, and they were running out of time. Miles away from this nexus of anxiety, in a quiet, humming maintenance corridor, Maya worked. Her world was one of concrete floors, insulated pipes, and the steady thrum of the vessel's hidden heart. To the frantic personnel who occasionally rushed past her, she was invisible, a ghost in a navy blue jumpsuit with maintenance stenciled on the back. She was just part of the background, a silent figure ensuring the lights stayed on and the water stayed pure while the real work, the important work, happened elsewhere. Her hands, stained with grease but deft and sure, methodically reassembled a secondary water filtration unit. Each twist of her wrench was precise, economical, a movement honed by countless hours of repetition. Her face, framed by a dark hoodie pulled low, was a study in calm. She wasn't ignoring the crisis, she was absorbing it. The frantic chatter from the facility-wide comms system washed over her not as noise, but as data. She filtered out the panic, the fear, the useless commands and focused on the core of the problem. She was listening. She was processing. She was understanding. When her task was complete, she wiped her hands on a rag and began her rounds. Her path took her past the main control room. The door had been propped open, a testament to the frantic comings and goings. For a moment she paused, her gaze drawn to the massive central screen that dominated the far wall. It displayed a high-fidelity 3D rendering of the Odyssey, her beautiful, streamlined form snagged grotesquely on a jagged outcrop of rock. Lines of telemetry and error codes scrolled down the sides of the screen, a frantic digital cry for help. Maya saw it instantly. Not with the eyes of a maintenance tech, but with the eyes of someone who understood pressure, leverage, and the unforgiving physics of the deep. They were trying to solve the problem with brute force, using the submersible's powerful robotic arm to pull and tear at the obstruction. But the schematic showed the snag point clearly. A critical latch on an external equipment bay was caught. The arm was too rigid, its movements too coarse. It was like trying to perform surgery with a sledgehammer. It needed a human touch, an intuitive understanding of angles and torsion that a machine, no matter how sophisticated, could not replicate. Without thinking, she took a single step into the room, her presence a sudden, quiet disruption in the storm of activity. Greg, turning from a console, spotted her immediately. His face, already flushed with stress, darkened with irritation. "What do you want?" he snapped, his voice dripping with condescension. This is a restricted area. There's a backed-up sink on the third deck. Go make yourself useful. His words were meant to dismiss, to diminish, to put her back in the box he had built for her. But Maya didn't flinch. Her eyes remained fixed on the screen. She raised a single, grease-stained finger and pointed. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but carried the weight of absolute certainty. You're pulling on the housing. You're going to tear it from the hull. The release mechanism is manual. There's an override pin. A simple quarter turn, right there. Greg's mouth opened, a furious retort already forming on his lips. He was about to verbally tear her apart, to have her thrown out. But another voice cut through the tension, sharp and desperate. What did you say? Arthur Harrison turned, his eyes locking onto Maya for the first time. He didn't see a maintenance worker. He saw a calm island in his raging sea of panic. He saw an answer he didn't know he was looking for. He repeated the question, his voice lower now, more intense. The pin. Explain. Maya met his gaze, her own expression unreadable. She stepped forward, her worn boots silent on the deck. The schematics for the external pods show a manual release pin. It's a failsafe for exactly this situation. Your robotic arm can't get the right torque angle from its current position. It keeps slipping. It needs to be turned by hand. The simplicity of her statement hung in the air, a stark contrast to the complex, failing solutions being attempted. Greg, seeing his authority being completely undermined by a janitor, let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. By hand? We're at 400 meters. The pressure would crush a person in seconds. Are you insane? He turned to Harrison, trying to reclaim control. Sir, we'd need a specialized saturation dive team from the mainland. They're fully equipped for that depth. I've already put in the call. They're 3 hours out. Harrison's face was grim. We don't have 3 hours, Greg. The pilots have 45 minutes of air, maybe less with their elevated heart rates. He turned his full attention back to Maya, his gaze searching. You sound like you know what you're talking about. What's your background? Where did you learn about deep-sea hardware? Maya hesitated for a fraction of a second, a flicker of a past she kept locked away. I've done some work in difficult environments, she said, her voice even. The vagueness of her answer was fuel for Greg's fire. His insecurity, stoked by Harrison's attention to this woman, manifested as cruel arrogance. He saw an opportunity not just to reassert his authority, but to utterly humiliate her. A nasty smirk spread across his face. Oh, really? Difficult environments, he mocked, his voice loud enough for the entire room to hear. Well, we have certain standards here. Every diver on this vessel, before they're even allowed to touch the gear, has to pass a simple test. A static apnea test. A breath hold. He folded his arms, playing to the room, casting himself as the guardian of professional standards. Why don't we see what our maintenance expert is really made of? Let's see how long she can survive when the pressure is on. He thought he was calling her bluff, exposing a fraud in front of the very man she was trying to impress. He had no idea he was about to pull the pin on a grenade. The scene shifted to the stark, blue-tiled training pool deep within the vessel. The air, thick with the smell of chlorine and tension, felt heavy. Word had spread, and many of the control room staff were now gathered, watching the scene on a large wall-mounted monitor. It was a welcome, if grim, distraction from the slowly dying submersible on their main screens. Greg stood at the edge of the pool, a digital stopwatch in his hand, his smugness radiating from him like heat. He was in his element, a petty king in a small kingdom, about to pass judgment. The standard for our entry-level divers is 90 seconds, he announced loudly, ensuring Harrison, who stood at the back, could hear. It's a basic measure of lung capacity and mental composure under stress. Let's see if you have either. Maya showed no emotion. She simply unzipped her jumpsuit, letting it fall to the floor. Underneath, she wore a simple, functional athletic top and shorts. As she moved, the harsh overhead lights caught a network of faint, silvery scars across her shoulders and back, intricate patterns that spoke of a violent history. But no one noticed. They saw only the unassuming woman they thought they knew. She stood at the water's edge and took 3 slow, deep, impossibly calm breaths. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. It was a ritual, a centering of the mind and body that was as natural to her as breathing itself. Then, without a splash, she slipped into the water. She moved with a fluid grace that was utterly at odds with her clumsy maintenance uniform. She drifted to the bottom of the 3-meter pool, and lay perfectly still, her body a portrait of absolute tranquility. Greg clicked the stopwatch, his voice filled with theatrical importance. Time has started. He began to call out the seconds, a running commentary for his captive audience. 30 seconds. This is where most amateurs start feeling the burn. The panic reflex kicks in. He glanced at the monitor, expecting to see a struggle. There was none. 60 seconds. 1 minute. Not bad for a plumber, I'll admit. Very impressive. His tone was laced with sarcasm. 90 seconds. All right, you've made your point. You can come up now. But Maya did not move. She remained on the bottom of the pool, as still as a stone. The only sign of life was a slow, almost imperceptible pulse in her neck. Greg's smile began to falter. A nervous silence started to creep into the control room. 2 minutes. The hushed chatter died completely. Every eye was now glued to the monitor showing the woman at the bottom of the pool. 2 minutes and 30 seconds. 3 minutes. Greg was no longer smiling. He was staring at the water, a knot of cold disbelief tightening in his stomach. This wasn't possible. The best he had ever done was just over 2 minutes, and he had come up gasping, his lungs on fire. 4 minutes. Arthur Harrison leaned forward, his hands gripping the back of a chair. He was no expert, but he recognized what he was seeing. This wasn't just a physical feat of endurance. This was mastery. This was a level of discipline that was almost inhuman. He saw a weapon, perfectly honed, perfectly controlled. 5 minutes. One of the on-site medics took a step towards the pool, his expression deeply concerned. "Sir," he said to Greg, "her heart rate is dropping into the low 40s. This is entering the critical zone. Should we intervene?" Greg couldn't answer. He couldn't speak. He just stared at the stopwatch, then at the water. 6 minutes. The official record for the entire Triton crew, held by a veteran saturation diver with 20 years of experience, was 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Maya had just shattered it, and she was still lying peacefully at the bottom of a pool. 7 minutes. Greg was as white as a sheet of paper. The stopwatch in his hand felt like a block of ice. The numbers on it seemed to mock him, to dismantle his entire sense of order and hierarchy, second by agonizing second. At 7 minutes and 34 seconds, with the silent awe of the room at its peak, Maya moved. It was a single, fluid motion. She pushed off the bottom, and her head broke the surface of the water with barely a ripple. There was no desperate, gasping struggle for air. There was no panic. She took one controlled, quiet exhale, followed by a calm, steady inhale. She treaded water effortlessly and looked directly at Greg. Her eyes, clear and deep, held no anger, no triumph. They were simply the eyes of a professional who had completed a task. The control room was utterly, profoundly silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the servers. Then, a single voice, a junior technician, whispered what everyone was thinking. "My God, who is she?" Harrison knew. He didn't know the name of her unit, or the details of her service, but he knew with bone-deep certainty that he was in the presence of someone from the most elite, most demanding, most unforgiving training program on the planet. He turned to the pale, trembling Greg, and his voice was as cold and crushing as the deep sea itself. "Get her a suit. The best one we have." Now Greg, utterly broken and humiliated, could only nod, his authority evaporated. The world had been turned upside down. The janitor was now the commander. While the crew, now moving with a new, focused energy, prepared the most advanced deep dive suit on the vessel, Harrison approached Maya as she stood toweling her hair. The awe in the room was palpable. People who had never given her a second glance now couldn't look away. They gave her a wide berth, as if she were radiating an invisible energy. "That wasn't just experience," Harrison said, his voice low and filled with respect. "That wasn't a trick." "What was that?" Maya paused, then met his gaze. The mask of the invisible maintenance worker was gone, stripped away by the water. What remained was the operator she had been trained to be. "That was Tuesday," she said, her voice flat and devoid of ego. "Now let's talk about the mission parameters. The currents at that depth will be unpredictable. I need real-time data on thermoclines and eddies. And I want direct control over my gas mixture." No automation. She was no longer asking for permission. She was giving her terms. She was in command. Her transformation was absolute. The quiet woman who fixed pipes was gone. In her place stood a warrior, ready to descend into the dark. The descent was a journey into another world. The small submersible, a rapid deployment vehicle called the Angel, dropped through the water column, leaving the world of light and air behind. Through her helmet's viewport, Maya watched the sunlit blues fade to twilight indigo, then to a profound and utter blackness. The only light was the twin beams from her helmet, cutting a small, lonely cone through the darkness, illuminating a swirling cosmos of marine snow. The pressure mounted with every meter, a physical weight on the suit, a constant, crushing reminder of the hostile environment she was invading. Inside her helmet, the only sound was the steady hiss of her regulator and the calm, rhythmic beat of her own heart. The comms from the surface crackled with static, the voices of Harrison and the dive supervisor sounding distant and tinny, ghosts from another reality. Approaching target depth, she reported, her own voice unnaturally calm in the confined space. "Visibility is less than 5 meters. I'm running on sonar." On the screen in the control room, they watched her lone icon creep closer to the larger, stationary icon of the Odyssey. Every person held their breath. Then, a shape emerged from the gloom. It was the Odyssey, a beautiful, wounded giant, her powerful lights now dim and flickering. She was snagged grotesquely, her sleek hull canted at an unnatural angle against the reef. Through the thick acrylic viewport of the cockpit, Maya could just make out the two pilots, slumped in their seats, their movements slow and weak. They were running out of time. She unclipped from the Angel and used her thruster pack to navigate the treacherous currents, her movements precise and controlled. She was a surgeon approaching a patient. Reaching the snag point, she saw the problem was worse than the schematics had suggested. The robotic arms, clumsy, repeated attempts to wrench the latch free had bent the housing and partially sheared the pin. It wasn't a simple quarter turn anymore. It was a mangled wreck of metal that would require immense force and delicate precision to release. She braced herself and went to work, using a hydraulic torque wrench from her toolkit. The metal groaned in protest but didn't budge. She repositioned, trying a different angle. Sweat beaded on her forehead, the exertion in the high-pressure environment taxing her body. A shrill alarm suddenly blared in her helmet. A red warning flashed on her heads-up display, oxygen levels critical. Exertion exceeding projections. The voice of the dive supervisor crackled in her ear, laced with panic. "Maya, your O2 consumption is off the charts. You have less than 10 minutes of air at this rate. You need to abort. Repeat, abort the mission. Abort." The word was an obscenity. It meant leaving the two pilots to die. It meant failure. She looked at the mangled pin, then at the cockpit of the Odyssey. She had one chance. It was a technique she had practiced in the darkest, most secret training pools in the world. A last resort for impossible situations. A procedure so dangerous it was never spoken of outside of a handful of elite operators. She made her decision. "Surface, I'm going dark for a moment," she said, her voice betraying no hint of the monumental risk she was about to take. Conserving suit air for life support systems, before Harrison or the supervisor could protest, she reached up and sealed her internal helmet vents. Then, she activated a small, secondary tank on her suit. It wasn't oxygen. It was an experimental, oxygen-rich perfluorocarbon liquid. A cool, thick fluid flooded her helmet, covering her face. She forced herself to inhale. The sensation was that of drowning, a primal, horrifying reflex her body fought against with every fiber of its being. Her lungs burned as they filled with liquid instead of air. In the control room, they watched in horror as her biosigns went haywire. Her heart rate plummeted, her blood pressure spiked, and her EEG readings became chaotic. "She's convulsing. She's dying," the medic shouted. Harrison gripped the console, his knuckles white. "What is she doing?" he roared into the void. Down in the crushing dark, Maya fought through the agony. She was breathing liquid. Her body was screaming, but her mind was a shard of ice. She had a few precious minutes of consciousness before the toxicity became irreversible. She ignored the pain, ignored the fear. There was only the mission. She put the torque wrench back on the pin and activated it, putting her entire body, her entire will, into the effort. The world dissolved into a tunnel of pressure, cold, and the screaming protest of stressed metal. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Then, with a final, explosive crack that vibrated through the water and up her arms, the pin sheared off. The Odyssey lurched, free from the reef's grasp. Its emergency ascent thrusters fired automatically, and the great machine began to rise, a ghost ascending towards the distant surface. Maya, utterly spent, hung in the water, her vision blurring at the edges. With her last ounce of strength, she purged the liquid-breathing system. The fluid drained from her helmet, and she slammed the emergency regulator into her mouth, taking a ragged, desperate breath of recycled air. She had done it. Her own ascent was slow, a textbook-perfect climb to avoid decompression sickness, every action dictated by years of relentless training. When her helmet finally broke the surface, the world exploded in light and sound. The support boat was there in an instant, strong hands pulling her from the water. On the deck of the Triton, the crew had secured the Odyssey. The hatch was open, and the two pilots, weak and trembling but alive, were being helped onto the deck, breathing in the sweet, clean air. Harrison was waiting for Maya, as she was helped out of her suit. He didn't speak. He simply stepped forward, took the heavy helmet from her hands, and looked at her. His eyes, once filled with panic, now held a look of profound, unshakable respect that transcended the boundaries of CEO and employee. It was the look of one human being acknowledging the incredible strength of another. Later, in his spacious office aboard the vessel, the formal offer was made. Maya stood before his desk, not in a jumpsuit, but in a simple, clean uniform the crew had found for her. Greg was also there, standing silently in the corner, a ghost at his own funeral. "I'm not offering you a promotion," Harrison said, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm offering you a blank slate. I want you to run my entire deep-sea operations division. Redesign it from the ground up. Safety protocols, crisis response, personnel training. Write your own ticket, set your own budget. The division is yours." He then turned his head slightly, addressing Greg without making eye contact. "You saw a uniform, Greg. You saw a job title. You looked at one of the most capable human beings I have ever met, and you saw a janitor. You are a liability. You are relieved of all command authority. Go back to the surface and learn from this. Learn to see the person, not the label." Greg simply nodded, his face pale and empty, and walked out of the room, his career in ruins. Harrison turned back to Maya. "So, what do you say?" Maya looked out the viewport at the endless blue ocean, her ocean. For the first time in years, she felt like she was home. She met Harrison's gaze and gave a single, decisive nod. Her journey out of the shadows and back into the light was complete. We look at people every day and see only the uniform they wear, the janitor, the clerk, the technician. We put them in boxes, define them by their job, and never once think to look inside. We see a quiet surface and assume it means a shallow depth. But we never see the battles they have fought, the training they have endured, or the pressures they have learned to withstand. The world's greatest treasures, its most incredible strengths, are often hidden in plain sight, disguised as ordinary. So the next time you overlook someone, the next time you dismiss a person because of their station, remember Maya. Remember that a quiet surface can hide the strength of the entire ocean. True strength isn't about the title you hold or the authority you wield. It's about the courage you carry within, the depths you are willing to brave when everything is on the line. Who have you underestimated today? Share this story to remind someone that everyone is fighting a battle you know nothing about, and that within the most overlooked person might just be the hero you've been waiting for.